Hello everyone, Lisa here bringing to you styles, architecture styles, and specifically the historic architectural style of Trinidad and Tobago. Now, today we're going to learn a lot. And I have with me one of the most qualified persons, I believe, to help us learn about this style. So, I'll just give you a little bit of her background. She is a registered architect and she is past president and fellow of the TTIA, that is the Trinidad and Tobago Institute of Architects. She is the president and founding member of Citizens for Conservation here in Trinidad and Tobago. She is the chairman of the Landmarks Committee National Heritage Trust here in Trinidad and Tobago. She is also the president of the International Council of Monuments and Sites here in Trinidad and Tobago National Committee. That's the national committee here. And that's just to name a few. She has worked in the field of restoration for 46 years, both internationally and locally. She was head of the Ministry of Works Historical Restoration Unit here in Trinidad and Tobago for 12 years, where she worked on different projects. She was actually the project architect on government projects such as the Whitehall project and the Treasury Building Rehabilitation project. She also monitored government preservation projects such as the Queen's Royal College, the old Fire Brigade building, and the old police headquarters. In her private practice, she was project architect for restoration of the Stallmeyer's Castle, and she is Parliament's preservation consultant for the Parliament building, that is the Red House. And it doesn't stop there. She is also the Catholic Church's advisor on all historic churches, and she lectures for the National Trust and the Citizens for Conservation as part of her lobby to educate citizens about Trinidad and Tobago historic architecture. You have any idea what I'm talking about? Well, today I have with me Miss Rudylynn DeFour Roberts. Thank you. Thank you for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
It's nice to be here. Always glad to teach people about our local architecture. That's fine.
Yeah. But wait, breaking news. The Republic of Trinidad and Tobago has awarded the Zirconia Medal Silver to Rudylynn DeFour Roberts in the sphere of built heritage conservation and preservation. The country recognizes and profoundly appreciates your long and meritorious service in this field. To you I say congratulations and thank you for all that you have done. Now, right back to style. That's good. So I grew up in Belmont, and I remember in Belmont seeing so many of these old-time houses, and there are quite a few on the Belmont Circular Road. Even my aunt lives in one of those, and I would always describe it as a classical, type house. And growing up, I would always describe it as classical. But I know that you have a lot of experience based on all that we heard, you would just describe to us, about the historical architecture here. So we want to just define, first up, the historical style, and specifically the specific style as it relates to Trinidad in particular, because in our conversations, I learned that there's a slightly different style in Tobago, and so maybe you could tell us a little bit about what exists here in Trinidad.
In Trinidad, we have several different styles. For those of you who are familiar with the population of Trinidad and Tobago, we are what we call a Callaloo community, where we have people from so many different races and so many different ethnic backgrounds. And when you combine all of that, you get a very eclectic architecture. So if we start to go back into the days when we were a colony, and you will find that we have some buildings that are Georgian, for instance, the police barracks. Our civic buildings are classical,
Okay.
Greek Roman style architecture.
Mhm.
Our churches are mostly Gothic,
Gothic. Okay.
neo-Gothic, really, because it's a reintroduction of the Gothic style. And our houses, the ones that have survived to this today, tend to be Victorian.
Victorian. Okay.
So, and sometimes you find people will combine the different styles,
Okay.
because again, like I said, we are that kind of people. My house mustn't look like yours, and everybody wants their house to be different.
Right.
We have a few houses that we refer to as queens of the bands, because
Okay.
they're so elegant and have so much decoration on them. So the actual style is difficult to give us one style,
Okay.
but we have varied styles and varied
Mm.
combinations of styles in Trinidad. And in Tobago, you have it's slightly different. The buildings are a smaller scale,
Mhm.
and you will find Victorian cottages in between very traditional buildings and churches that have wood shakes on the siding
Okay.
and things like that, which you don't see in Trinidad.
Okay.
So there are some slight differences as when you try to compare them.
Okay. Wow. Okay. So you gave us a little bit there about the different styles and Trinidad and Tobago being like a, a whole mix
Yes.
of styles.
Yeah.
Can you give us maybe just a few characteristics of each style or?
Sure. Yeah. Okay. In the government buildings, the civic buildings, you will see like the Red House, for instance.
Mm.
That is a classical building. It's got Greek and Roman design elements.
Okay.
You have the churches that are Gothic, neo-Gothic, and you can identify them by their pointed arches.
Okay.
Their windows that are called lancet windows, so they're pointed at the top and they're long like a lancet knife.
Oh, okay.
So they call lancet windows, and the Gothic churches, even the big ones in the city, have those shaped windows. The little ones, you see it all over the place, all in the countryside. This pointed arch. Pointed arch is Gothic.
Okay.
Right? And most of those churches are made out of stone and have buttresses at the side as structural supports. So that's Gothic. Our Victorian influence tends to be the smaller houses that a lot of people call gingerbread.
Right.
So you have all the fretwork, the fancy little foo-foo stuff, and pretty dolly house looking kind of houses. But we have big versions and we have smaller versions, because what you would find is that the estate houses, the great estate houses, and the houses of the more affluent people built in that style would be quite large and would have what we call a porte cochere to the front.
Right.
It would have gable roofs and dormer windows and finials, which are the little pieces that reach to the sky at the end of the of the gable end of the window.
Right.
And you have the fretwork, which is wooden lacy detail that is added to gable ends. It's added to the porch. It's added above doors. And in a lot of the instances, it has a specific use in the way it was applied. You understand? So but you have the small Victorian houses, which are miniatures of the great houses. And very often you would find that the artisans that actually built the great houses, they themselves lived in miniature houses and built smaller houses like you said in Belmont.
Yes.
Those are a lot of the houses in Belmont are those smaller Victorian houses, particularly on Belmont Circular Road.
Wow.
You would find that. And across the street, one side you will have these medium-sized smaller houses, and on the opposite sides you have the huge ones that have the same detail.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, those I remember seeing those details, like the fretwork.
Yes.
And my aunt's house has all the fretwork
all
to
the
the
fretwork
front
and the front, right.
finial to the
Yes,
top. So
yes,
house
yes.
is like a miniature.
Yes. Yeah.
Victorian.
They're so pretty. Our architecture is joyous. Our vernacular architecture is joyous compared to the Georgian styles that you see in Barbados and in the smaller islands and in Jamaica. We have all this decoration and pretty, you know, and it goes with our personality because we like mass and we like carnival and our, you know, and it's all part of the of our cultural background, you know.
Nice,
so our buildings reflect our cultural background, our ethnic background. And you will find fretwork, for instance, on some of the smaller Victorian houses. You have some of the patterns have Catholic symbols included. Have Hindu symbols included.
That. So those patterns are not random. They aren't.
Not all of them. Some of them. Now there came a point where fretwork started to be manufactured, and you could go to Richmond Street. The architect George Brown, he had a workshop on Richmond Street, and you could go there and you could order fretwork by the length for your bashboards and for your what your finials look like. And you could order it from a catalog from him. He did the same thing with cast iron. You could go to him, but the cast iron fretwork was generally used in the grander houses and in the commercial buildings. For instance, Lower Frederick Street.
Right. When you look up,
when you see all the cast iron balustrade and very New Orleans like, you know, cast iron balustrade and the cast iron columns, the fretwork on the ridge of the roof, you know, we call that crestings, and they have beautiful finials. The finials are very magical looking in all kinds of lovely designs and stuff like that.
That's nice. I just want to encourage someone, if you're in Trinidad and you're on Frederick Street and you're walking up, look up and you'd see what we're talking about. It's so often for us to just keep it at eye level and not really pay attention to.
So there was a time when you could buy fretwork for above your doors, for wherever you want it, from a catalog. And they were manufacturing the wooden pieces here. So you will find some patterns that are common and repeated in different houses, but then you will also find bespoke fretwork. Because many of the joiners made their own fretwork. My grandfather was a joiner, and he made his own fretwork. He had a fret saw and he had a shop and everything, and he would design and make his own fretwork. So, and he built houses for people. So that's where you see all the different patterns, the unusual patterns coming in. And if you don't know what you're looking for, sometimes you miss it. But it's there. It's there.
Wow. Okay, so you gave us some information there. Not every particular style of fretwork was just it just came out of nowhere. It was some were generated repeatedly, but then others were influenced by different factors. Could you just tell us maybe a little bit more about the influence and the influence generally on the style that we see here? In Trinidad?
I just want to go back a little bit in that fretwork is not typical only of Trinidad. Fretwork is used all over the world. And what happened was, particularly in the time of Queen Victoria, when people were traveling a lot to India, to the east, to China, to all these different places, that ideas in decorating buildings came back, and all the countries that were ruled by the colonists, they exchanged a lot of ideas. So you found that contractors, architects and whatnot, that people who have traveled and they would see things in other places and they would introduce it into other countries. And so you have in just about every country that the British colonized, you would find this Victorian style. So we have it here as well. But we have taken it a little step further and we've made it our own in introducing our own patterns and in our own styles. Now, you must understand that the whole idea of fretwork is actually African. came from North Africa.
Wow.
All the screens and the things that you see in those countries are the old original idea of fretwork, where you have a lacy patterned screen where people could be inside and you can't see them, but it allows the ventilation.
Okay.
Because those countries are very hot. They back in those days, of course, there's no air
Right.
conditioning, and it allowed air to pass from one side of the house through the house to the other side. And what we did in Trinidad is that we have fretwork above all the doors and the windows, both inside and outside, on the outside walls as well.
Right.
So that the air came through those windows, that fixed
Yeah.
ventilation above the windows and doors came into the house.
Right.
And in all of those old Victorian cottages, the walls only go to a certain height and there's fretwork above that.
Yes.
And
That's
so
true.
that air passes through the house and helps to keep the house cool. It comes in on one side above the windows and doors through fretwork. It passes through the house, fretwork above all the interior walls, and passes out onto the other side of the house, fretwork again above the windows and doors. So that's the fretwork had a use. It wasn't just decoration.
It wasn't just decoration.
Right.
Nice. That's good to
Yes.
know. So the
Yeah.
house was naturally cool,
The house was naturally cool, yes.
not
with the
necessarily
fretwork.
needing what we would want to have, typical air conditioning unit.
Well, yeah, and I mean, in those days, you didn't have air conditioning units.
Right,
So the vernacular homes were designed to take advantage of the cooling air currents.
Right.
So you'd have the houses built off the ground, 3 feet at least,
Right.
so that air can pass under the ground, and this kept the floor timbers dry, so that you don't get wet rot and termites don't set in. Right? You have the fretwork above the windows and doors and above the interior walls to help air pass through the house. And then you
ventilation.
have the attic. The roofs were all done in, a steep gable end roofs or steep hip end roofs. There was always an attic space, so that you have a ceiling, and the attic space is where the heat from the roof would accumulate.
Oh, okay.
And in a hip end roof, you have vents along the eaves to let out that hot air.
Yeah.
In a gable end roof, what you had was windows, dormer windows. You'd have a window at the gable end, and you'd have dormer windows on the sides where the roof is sloping.
Right.
And those windows took the hot air from the attic out. So there was air flowing through the attic, there's air flowing through the house, and
Yeah.
there's air flowing under the house. And that is what helped keep
Yeah.
the houses cool.
So what I'm hearing you say is that the form follows the function.
That's right. That's right. That's right. There was a time when all of Port of Spain was wooden buildings, and then we had a great fire that burned down pretty much everything. And then they rebuilt Port of Spain using stone,
Okay.
a lot of stone from Lavantil quarries,
Oh, okay.
and cast iron structures, beams, columns, etc., because these were more or less fireproof,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So you have now an influence. What is influencing is utility, because then you're trying to, because of the fires that happen from open flames and candles and lanterns and stuff. This new style of architecture came in, where they were using stone and cast iron.
Oh, okay. I
Right?
understand.
So and it's one of the things that I like to talk about, particularly the stone aspect of it,
Okay.
because a lot of people look at these old buildings as being old thing, and this colonial and massa they done, and that kind of
Yes.
attitude. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
What we forget is that our great grandparents and our great grandparents, they were the ones who built these buildings.
Right.
They're the ones who had the talent, and they were the artisans that built the buildings. They were the ones who quarried the stone in Laventille and brought the stone down to build the walls and whatnot. And, you know,
Yes.
all through Port of Spain, you see stone walls.
Yes, it's
All
true.
through Port of Spain, from La Perouse Cemetery, all the curbs. You know,
Yeah.
if you walk with your head down,
So first I have to walk with my head up. Now I have to walk
right,
with my head
you
down.
will see some of the streets still have the original stone
Stone in it.
curbs.
Okay, I
Right?
will do that.
Yes, some of the streets still have the original stone curbs, and so it's our ancestors that built all these things, and so that you need to have, especially where the fretwork and the finer detailing is concerned, the talent that went into doing that. You need to appreciate what they did,
Right.
and how much effort was put into it and how much pride
Yeah.
they put into
So
it.
I
And
should
to
not
me,
see-
it seems so disrespectful when you look at an old building that's been put up with care and
And say,
talent
tear
and
it
stuff
down.
and say tear it down. You know that, you know, the old thing, and without even thinking about it.
yeah.
You know, just because it's of a different era doesn't mean that it has no worth. It's like your grandmother, for instance. You know, when she gets past a certain age, you don't just put out on the sidewalk.
Yes.
It's, you know, you take care of
Right.
you take care of your
Yeah.
antique chairs and your antique, because they're valuable, and an old home is the same. It needs care and attention, but it is worth. It has its worth.
Yes, and you appreciate.
And you have to
so-
appreciate, yes,
So
yes.
some of us, we may need to change our mindset on seeing
Yes.
and these older buildings and not
Yes.
just looking at it as that's history.
Because
But that-
because one of the things that happens is that for some reason people, well, no, I wouldn't say for some reason, we know why. People associate a wooden house with poverty.
Yes.
Okay? Which isn't really true, because most of the grand houses long ago were built out of wood.
Yes.
And the wooden houses are cooler than the concrete houses
Right.
because of the chemical composition of wood. It doesn't transfer the heat from the outside to the inside as rapidly as a concrete block would.
Wow. Yeah.
Because the molecules in a concrete block are packed tight together, so the heat transfers very quickly. And at the end of the day, you're living in a concrete house and you come home and you put your hand on the wall
And it's warm. It's hot.
and it heats up the whole
Yes.
house. But that doesn't happen in a wooden house. So, you know, it's like, yes, it's an old style, but it is far more suitable for a tropical climate to live in a wooden house than
okay.
to live in a concrete
And
block
you know,
house.
I was going to ask you that question about what can we really learn from these
That's one of
older
the things.
style
That's one of the things we could
houses.
learn. We learn about how the ventilation helps us. Through ventilation, how you must put windows, opposite windows and doors and stuff, so that you can get the air flowing through. You learn about the materials that you use, because the wood is better than concrete, where keeping a building cool is involved. So that there are lessons to learn in every aspect. The churches have very thick walls, and that also helps to prevent the heat transfer from when the sun is hitting the outside of the wall and you touch the inside of the wall. It's
still
generally cool
cool.
because the wall is so massive.
Yeah, so it doesn't transfer
Yes,
as
yes,
quickly.
yes,
Okay.
yes, yes.
All right.
And even in the churches, if you look at the design of all of these little country churches, the design of the cathedral, both cathedrals, Immaculate Conception and Trinity Cathedral, all the historic churches that we have, the same applies where ventilation is concerned. They all are designed so that to take advantage of convection currents. So the air will come in through the windows and through the doors, but there's always a wait for the hot air to rise and go out through the top level windows, or blow from one side of the church to the other. All of the churches, when you go into them, you can see that they are specifically designed that way.
Okay, so
to
not
stay
just
cool.
not just the houses, but the
No,
churches
yes,
as
the churches
well.
as well.
Because the principle remains the
The
same.
principle remains the same. In fact, the Red House was like that.
Mm-hmm.
The Red House had verandas which kept the heat of the sun out of the inner rooms that were offices.
Right.
All those doors on the verandas opened up and had a short door that was made out of wooden louvers, tiny wooden louvers, so that when you opened the door, you have privacy with the short door with the
Yes.
louvers, but because they were louvers, it allowed air to come through,
Right.
and then the air came through above and below the door, and it
Okay.
cooled and it went out through the other side and went out the other side of the building. So the building was designed like
Yeah.
that. Now, in nowadays, when you have lots of paper on your desk and all that, you can't have breeze flying through the building. So yes, we acknowledge that air conditioning is necessary in commercial use and for offices and things
Spaces.
like that. And of course, it's a lot hotter now, I find, than when I was a child.
Yeah,
I
it is.
just find it's just quite different. But tropical architecture is like that. It's like there are certain principles of tropical architecture that you find in all our buildings, and these principles apply all around the world, all the whole equatorial belt. That's how we build. That's how people build.
You mentioned something about verandas, and I was going to ask about that. I know sometimes, persons may be building houses now, may have a veranda or may not, or it may be shallow or anything of that sort.
Yeah.
But the verandas had a purpose.
The verandas had a
It wasn't
purpose.
just to line. It wasn't just to...
The verandas kept the heat of the sun
Yes.
from the inner rooms,
Right.
to keep the inner rooms cool, because it was all about comfort. In the Victorian times, in the Georgian times, it was all about the comfort of the person living in the house. So most houses had wraparound verandas. So three sides of the house would have this big wraparound veranda, and it wasn't that. And we know you can't lime on all three sides at the same time,
No.
but it was for more than that. It was so that it could keep the harsh sun out of the inner rooms, right? And then when you add fretwork onto the veranda,
It's filtered.
that filtered the sun, and it had a creative aspect as well as a useful aspect. Creative in the sense that when the sun came through the fretwork, you would see the patterns on the floor,
yes.
right?
Very pretty.
Very, very pretty. But it also filtered the rain, and it also filtered the sun. So the sun in the veranda is not as harsh as if you're standing outside.
Okay.
So it made it more user friendly. Now there's a cultural thing to it, verandas in Trinidad, in that we have a Spanish heritage, and we have a French heritage, and we have a British heritage, and sometimes you have to smile when you see the houses and you see how some of the houses have nice big verandas, and some have verandas but they all have louvered window, louvered, and so that right away you pick up that our Spanish and French heritage, we're very social. You're talking to people. You're talking to the lady across the road, whoever passing on the sidewalk in the urban areas. You sat on the veranda as a social thing, so that when people pass and going home in the evening, you're talking to them. You don't have to come in the house. They can stand up right outside and talking to you. And that's just how we lived.
Right.
You find that the Scottish and the British tended to want a veranda for the same reasons, to filter the light, to have someplace cool to sit out in the evening, but they didn't want people looking at them, and they not necessarily want to be chatting with the people. So they would close up the veranda with wooden louvers, which we call jalousies.
Oh,
we call them jalousies.
So
So there's a good possibility when you could look at a house, especially the smaller ones, and sort of kind of get an idea of the background of the person who actually built the house by the way the house is styled.
Wow. You also spoke about, you just mentioned the word rain, and I was wondering about the shape of the roof or the style. I know some persons would approach me and say, okay, Lisa, I want a modern house or contemporary, and we think flat roof all the time. Which is, it has its
style.
place.
It has its place. Yes.
I'm not saying no.
But we can
But it's
learn
a
from
concrete
those,
roof,
yes,
and then of course it's hot,
yes,
so you have to insulate it
right,
above and below.
yes,
Right. Most of these older homes, they depended on the prevailing breezes to cool the house. So the roofs have fairly steep slopes. Now, if you go up the islands, you will see that most of the roofs are hip roofs,
okay,
and in Tobago. And that is the best shaped roof for hurricanes and tropical storms,
okay,
because the wind doesn't catch underneath and lift it.
lift, yeah,
Right?
correct.
When you have a gable end roof, the wind will push against the gable end, and it could collapse the gable end, and then it collapses the roof. When the roof, when it slopes on all sides, the wind just goes up. It's not pushing against anything flat. So you most of the buildings and the homes in Barbados and in Jamaica and in the
yeah.
smaller islands, you will find that shape roof, because it is more suitable for the hurricanes, and they get hurricanes.
Yeah.
We didn't have that. And recently we know
got
what
away.
happened yesterday. We got away again,
we got
right?
away.
Okay, so we never had hurricanes in Trinidad much, right? So we tended to build taller, prettier, more joyous buildings, lots of gable
Wow,
ends,
okay.
not as many hip end roofs.
Yeah.
And so that is climate, that is our climate
Yeah, and it has
influence the
right.
style of the house.
Wow, okay, wow,
Right.
that's good to know. We got that, talking about that influence there with the environment and how it has shaped even the style of our roofs, that's so important. Something maybe we've overlooked, we've never noticed before. If you've traveled up the islands, you would see that there's a different style, but you're not quite sure what it is. But yeah, you can now look at these features and be able to tell, okay,
Yes.
this is...
Yeah, because the again, up the islands, they don't have large eaves on their roofs.
They don't.
That's because the wind doesn't hook under the eave and pull the roof
Let
out.
me just define. The eave is that portion where that exterior wall and the projection just of the
yes,
roof,
the overhang projection of the
overhang
roof.
projection of the roof, right?
Right.
So that's
Yeah.
what we're calling
Yeah.
the eave.
Yeah.
Okay.
So in houses like in Tobago and in up the and further up the islands, you will have very small eaves, and then you would have awnings over the windows, which are sacrificial. They can blow off during a hurricane, and they're easy to replace.
Okay.
In Trinidad, we have big, wide eaves, so that we can keep our windows open even when it's
Yes,
raining.
even when it's raining, wow.
So, and that's because, again, we don't get the hurricane.
So our architectural style is quite unique then.
Yeah, it's different. It's different
it's really
from
different
from the other
the other islands.
the other islands.
Yeah,
Yes, it
wow,
is
that's
different. We have joyous architecture. That's what that's what I call it. It's pretty and it's
Yeah.
frou-frou.
Well, okay, so I know you are associated with the National Trust and the Citizens for Conservation. Is there anything you want to say about those organizations?
Yeah, well, what Citizens for Conservation is a group that we lobbied for the establishment of a national trust, and because we felt that we were losing our old buildings and we needed to have a law to protect the old buildings. So we spent many years lobbying politicians. We assisted in the research to write the National Trust Act. In fact, we drafted the original act, and it was a long struggle, but we eventually got a national trust, which is now in the process of listing buildings for protection, legal protection. So we don't have things like buildings being knocked down now without somebody knowing what was happening and trying to intervene. And we used to have to resort to standing in front of bulldozers to save buildings, right?
Wow,
Which is which is Citizens for Conservation did that a number of times.
Wow.
And one of the buildings that we did save was the George Brown building around the Savannah.
Okay.
Yes, that is kind of where the whole movement started. So what we like to do is encourage people who are interested in our old architecture, interested in heritage buildings, to join the National Trust.
Okay.
Because the National Trust is now where everybody is working, doing research, doing list buildings, so that they now do dossiers on all the historic buildings, and then the dossier is presented to the minister with a recommendation that this building needs to be protected, and then the minister will sign off on it and say yes, okay, and we go ahead and put it on the list and stuff like that. So it's if you're interested, particularly for educational aspects, there are always lectures and tours and all sorts of things like that. So that if you're interested in old buildings, you're interested in heritage of built environment, then the National Trust is the place to be. And the National Trust, members of the trust are just citizens just like you and me, and anybody. You just go online and you go to their website and you can join. And then you will get all the information and what's happening, and lectures and tours and all the good things. Now the National Trust is located at Millflare, which is one of the buildings around the Savannah. And whereas long ago Citizens for Conservation managed Stonemeyer's Castle, and we used to have weddings and parties and things like that there. Now if you want now if you want that kind of magical wedding, you can go to Millflare.
Okay, great.
You want to be active in the lobby for the preservation of heritage, Citizens for Conservation is the place to be. National Trust is about education and awareness and tours, and they do the research and all that for the actual preservation. We are the ones that go and stand up in front of the bulldozer and quarrel and write nasty letters to people.
Oh boy, an interesting conversation. I learned a lot, for sure. And if you want to get in contact with the National Trust or the Citizens for Conservation, I would leave the information in the description box so that you will know how to reach out to them. Thank you so very much for joining me today, for being here to share all this information. I have a lot to digest, it's a nice refresher, and I learned a few new things. And I'll pay attention, I'll look up and I'll look down.
Yes. Look up and look down.
Learn a lot. If you live in a community where you have these older houses, it would be good maybe just to
just pay attention when you're walking past. A lot of people just walk past buildings and they don't look at them. And every time I talk to young people, when they're just amazed, they say, oh my gosh, yes, that's true, my grandmother's house, and oh my goodness, I didn't realize that. And you know, it's so just pay attention to the buildings when you're walking, and you will see all the things we talked about.
And appreciate
the craftsmanship. The craftsmanship of our ancestors. Right?
Going into the woods. Thank you again for joining me. Thank you for tuning in. Remember to subscribe to my channel. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on YouTube. And I'll see you again in another episode of Styles. Take care.